On a quiet Saturday morning in November 1988, a 9-year-old girl was dragged screaming into a car in the middle of a grocery store parking lot. Minutes later, her scooter lay abandoned on the asphalt, one handlebar twisted toward the curb, as if pointing to where she had been. What was left behind would wait more than 3 decades to speak, and when it finally did, it would reveal how close the truth had been all along. Sharon Garecht stepped out onto the sidewalk and looked down the street, then back toward the house, as if she might have missed something obvious. She raised her voice just enough to carry. "Michaela?" No answer came back, only the low, constant sound of traffic moving along Mission Boulevard. She checked her watch and frowned slightly. She should be back by now, she thought, the idea passing through her mind without urgency, without fear, just mild confusion. That small pause, that moment of wondering where a child had gone, was unremarkable. It was the kind of thought parents had every day. Michaela Joy Garecht was 9 years old, an age balanced delicately between dependence and independence. She was old enough to be trusted with small errands, young enough to still feel proud of that trust. She liked being capable, liked being told, "You can do this yourself." It showed in the way she moved through the world, quick steps, head up, always in motion. She lived with her mother in Hayward, California, in a neighborhood defined by familiarity rather than excitement. Sidewalks were cracked but known. The corner store was close enough that it barely registered as distance. The Rainbow Market sat 2 blocks away, a place Michaela had gone to countless times for snacks, sodas, small treats that felt earned. It wasn't an adventure. It was routine. Michaela's world was anchored by simple things. School during the week, friends close by, afternoons spent outside whenever possible. She loved her scooter, the freedom of it, the quiet speed, the way the pavement hummed beneath her feet. It gave her a sense of control, of movement, of going somewhere on her own terms. Her friendship with Trina Rodriguez, fit naturally into that rhythm. They were the kind of friends who didn't need elaborate plans. They walked and rode together, shared small secrets, argued briefly, and moved on just as quickly. Being together felt automatic, unremarkable in the best way. That Saturday morning unfolded like any other. Michaela dressed without hesitation, already knowing what she would wear. A t-shirt with the word Metro printed across the front. Rolled-up denim jeans, black Mary Jane shoes she slipped on easily. She chose her pearl-colored, feather-shaped earrings without comment, fastening them carefully before heading toward the door. "Don't be long," Sharon said, not looking up right away. "We won't," Michaela replied, her voice light, already halfway gone. Outside, Trina waited. Scooters rested against the curb. The air was cool but bright, carrying the smell of damp pavement and distant exhaust. The girls pushed off together, wheels humming softly as they moved down the street, their voices fading as they turned the corner. Inside the house, Sharon returned to her morning. Nothing felt unfinished. Nothing felt wrong. The plan existed only in its simplicity. A short errand, a familiar route, a child who knew where she was going. Minutes passed, then a few more. Sharon glanced at the clock again, then toward the door, her expression thoughtful but calm. Children ran late, conversations stretched. Time slipped without warning. She stepped outside once more, scanning the street with a hand shading her eyes. "Any minute now," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The morning remained quiet, ordinary, unchanged. And in that ordinariness, no one yet recognized the moment for what it was, the last stretch of time before the day broke away from everything it was supposed to be. Saturday, November 19th, 1988, approximately 10:15 a. Rainbow Market, Hayward, California. The morning was bright enough to make everything look harmless. At the Rainbow Market, the light fell cleanly across the parking lot, turning windshields into pale mirrors and casting sharp shadows under parked cars. A faint chill still lingered in the air, the kind that sat low on the skin before the sun fully warmed it, and the smell of the place was a familiar mix exhaust drifting in from Mission Boulevard, the sour-sweet tang of spilled soda near the curb, and something faintly soapy from the store's freshly cleaned entryway. Customers moved in and out without urgency, their footsteps quick, ordinary, their hands full of small bags that rustled when they walked. Michaela Garecht and Trina Rodriguez, arrived on their scooters just after 10 o'clock, coasting to the front of the store with the casual confidence of children in a neighborhood that felt known. The metal frames of the scooters clinked softly as they leaned them near the front door, what would later be remembered as the front door, though time would change the building and make that doorway a side entrance. At that moment, it was simply the place you left things for a minute, the place you expected them to be when you stepped back outside. Inside, the Rainbow Market breathed cool air from its refrigerators and smelled faintly of cleaning solution and warm bread. A bell chimed as they entered. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, washing everything in a steady, pale glow. Michaela moved with purpose, scanning shelves, counting coins, choosing what she wanted without hesitation. Food, sodas, small snacks that felt like a reward. Trina stayed close, their voices low and quick as they made tiny decisions that mattered only because they were theirs. "Get the soda," Trina said, reaching toward the cooler door. "Okay, too," Michaela replied, the word metro on her shirt catching the light as she turned. They paid and stepped back outside, the sunlight making them squint for a second. The air felt sharper out here, tinged with car heat and asphalt, and the parking lot sounded bigger than the store engines turning over, tires rolling slowly, a distant horn, the constant wash of traffic. The girls started walking home, talking as they went, and for a few steps it seemed as though the errand had already ended neatly, as though the only thing left was the familiar rhythm of heading back the way they had come. Then Trina stopped. "Our scooters," she said, the words coming out with a sudden certainty, as if she could still see them leaning where they'd left them. Michaela's head snapped back toward the store. "Oh yeah," Michaela said, and they turned around together. The first thing they noticed when they approached the entrance again was the empty space. One scooter stood where it should have been, angled slightly, handlebar turned toward the glass door. The other was gone, not knocked over, not moved a few inches. Gone. The parking lot suddenly felt wider, more exposed, the kind of openness that makes a child feel small without understanding why. They scanned the lot instinctively, eyes moving from car to car, from curb to curb. That was when Michaela spotted it, her scooter, not far away, placed farther down in the market parking lot, positioned near a parked car, as if someone had set it there deliberately, like bait placed carefully and left to wait. It was close enough to recognize immediately, close enough to make her shoulders relax for a fraction of a second. "There," Michaela said, pointing. "That's mine." She walked toward it without hesitation. The car beside it sat quiet and older, American-made, large enough to look heavy even when it didn't move. The paint was light cream or tannish gold, as Trina would later describe it, and it looked worn, like something that had lived through years of careless driving. The front bumper appeared battered, the kind of damage you noticed only when you looked closely, and there were marks along the sides that could have been cement splatters. The vehicle didn't look polished. It looked used, run down, the sort of sedan that blended into a parking lot because it didn't ask to be noticed. Michaela reached the scooter and bent down, both hands extending toward the handlebars. The car door opened. In the same instant, an unidentified white male stepped out from the driver's side, close enough that Michaela didn't have time to straighten up fully, close enough that the movement felt like an ambush rather than an approach. He was young 20s, according to Trina, tall, around 6 feet, with a slender build that made his movements quick and sudden. His hair hung to his shoulders, dirty blonde, and his face, in the brief clear view Trina would carry with her for years, looked marked by severe acne or pockmarks. His eyes struck her as well fox-like, blue, unnervingly focused. He wore a white t-shirt that made his arms look stark against the darker interior of the car. He did not speak. He reached down and wrapped his right arm around Michaela's waist with a practiced grip, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. Michaela's feet left the ground. Her hands flailed once, gripping air, her shoes scraping hard against the asphalt as she tried to kick free. The sound that came out of her was immediate, raw, piercing. A scream. It cut through everything, through engines, through traffic, through the lazy Saturday calm, and it was not a single burst. It continued, rising and falling as the man carried her toward the open door of the car. Her legs kicked, denim scraping against his arm. One of her black Mary Jane shoes struck the edge of the door frame with a dull thud as she twisted, her body bucking in a desperate attempt to turn away. Trina looked up at the scream and locked in place. For a heartbeat, her brain refused the scene. The world narrowed. The parking lot blurred at the edges. All she could see was Michaela's body lifted off the ground, the man's arms cinched tight around her waist, and the open mouth of the car like a trap. "Stop!" Trina heard herself say, but the word came out too small, too thin, swallowed by the noise. Michaela kept screaming. The man shoved her into the car, pushing with his arm, using his body to block her from falling back out. Michaela's hands clawed at the doorframe for a fraction of a second. Her fingers splayed, nails scraping metal, and then she disappeared into the seat, swallowed by the interior. The door slammed. Trina stood there, still frozen, still watching. "I looked up when I heard a scream," she would later say, her voice flat with shock even years afterward, "and I saw a man putting her into his car. She was still screaming. I just stood and watched, frozen in shock." The engine roared. The car lurched forward, tires biting the asphalt, and it sped out of the lot with a suddenness that made the air feel disturbed behind it, like a wake. Trina saw it angle toward Mission Boulevard, saw the light-colored sedan cut into traffic, and then it was moving south fast, toward Union City, disappearing into the stream of vehicles as if it had always belonged there. In the seconds it took to vanish, the parking lot returned to its ordinary motion. A shopper walking to their trunk, a cart rattling, a door closing somewhere else. But for Trina, the world had already split in two. She could not stay still anymore. Trina spun and ran back into the Rainbow Market, her sneakers slapping against the tile as she burst through the door. The bell chimed again, bright and pointless. "Help!" she shouted, breath tearing in her throat. Her face felt hot, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't point straight. "Someone took her. Someone took my friend." A female clerk behind the counter looked up, startled, then immediately reached for the phone. Trina stood there trying to speak through her breath, the words tangling, her mind still trapped on the image of Michaela's legs kicking, the scream ripping out of her like something alive. "Call the police," Trina said, forcing the sentence out. "Please call the police. AD Self." The clerk dialed. At approximately 10:23 a.m., the call went through. The clerk spoke quickly, relaying what she believed she had seen and what the child in front of her was saying, trying to compress chaos into a few usable lines. The dispatcher asked questions. The clerk answered, her voice urgent. And in those first crucial minutes, a description began to form, one that would matter more than anyone inside that store yet understood. Outside, Michaela's remaining scooter still stood near the entrance, tilted slightly, silent. The sun climbed higher. Cars continued to pass on Mission Boulevard in steady lines. People kept shopping, kept walking, kept living inside the same morning. And somewhere just beyond the edge of that ordinary world, a 9-year-old girl was gone. What happened next would unleash a search so massive it would swallow years, yet in the first crucial hours, the case would already begin to slip in the wrong direction. Police arrived at the Rainbow Market within minutes, their cruisers pulling into the parking lot with lights flashing but sirens off, as if the restraint might somehow keep the scene from escalating. Officers spread out quickly, one kneeling beside the abandoned scooter, another scanning the lot as though the car might still be hiding in plain sight. The air felt suddenly tighter, charged, carrying the faint smell of hot asphalt and exhaust as traffic continued to roll past on Mission Boulevard, indifferent to the urgency unfolding just yards away. Inside the store, Trina sat rigid on a chair near the counter, her legs swinging slightly because she could not make them stop moving. Her hands trembled in her lap. An officer crouched in front of her, notebook open, pen poised, his voice calm and measured. "Take a breath," he said gently. "Tell me what you saw." She swallowed hard. "He came out of the car," she said, words spilling faster now, driven by the need to be precise. "He grabbed her." She screamed. He put her inside. She shook her head once, sharply. He didn't say anything. "I'm Self." Officers moved between the store and the parking lot, radios crackling softly as details were relayed. A description began to take shape in real time, but not all of it came from the same place. A female store clerk, shaken and eager to help, spoke to a dispatcher and offered what she believed she had seen earlier in the lot, someone else entirely, a man she remembered as hippie-like, with a mustache, driving a burgundy-colored car. The information went out quickly, passed along the chain with urgency but without verification. Within hours, that description dominated the search. Flyers went up. Media broadcasts repeated it. Patrol units scanned roads for a mustached man in a burgundy vehicle, their eyes trained on the wrong silhouette as traffic streamed by. For nearly 2 days, the image circulated unchecked, shaping the public's understanding of what had happened and who they were looking for. Meanwhile, Trina's account sat nearby, quieter but more accurate, waiting to be fully heard. When detectives returned to her later, they pressed carefully for detail. "What did his face look like?" one asked. She closed her eyes briefly, forcing herself back into the moment. "His skin," she said slowly. "It wasn't smooth. He had, like bad acne, pockmarks." She opened her eyes again, and his hair was long, dirty blonde. He was tall. "What about the car?" "It was big," Trina said. "Old, not new. Light-colored." Those details would eventually be written down, filed, cross-checked. But for now, the wrong description had already taken on a life of its own. By early afternoon, the Hayward Police Department had escalated the response. Officers canvassed the surrounding neighborhoods, knocking on doors, asking the same questions again and again. "Did you see anything? Did you hear a scream? Did you notice a car leaving fast?" Helicopters lifted into the air, their blades chopping rhythmically as they traced paths over parks, hillsides, and unpopulated areas in southern Alameda County. The FBI joined the effort, adding resources, adding weight, adding urgency. Back at the parking lot, forensic technicians examined Michaela's scooter methodically. They photographed it where it stood, then bagged it carefully, treating it as more than a child's toy. Fingers gloved, movements precise, they lifted it away from the place it had been left behind. Latent fingerprints were recovered clean enough to matter, investigators believed, possibly belonging to the man who had touched it moments before Michaela reached for the handlebars. At home, Sharon Garecht sat at the kitchen table, the phone never leaving her reach. Officers moved in and out of the house, their voices low, their questions careful. She answered each one, her replies steady even as her hands clenched and unclenched in her lap. "She went to the store," Sharon said. "She knows the way. She's done it 100 times. We're doing everything we can," an officer told her, meeting her eyes. "We'll find her." As the hours passed, the search grew louder and more public. Within a day, thousands of missing person flyers were printed and distributed, volunteers fanning out across Hayward and the surrounding Bay Area, taping Michaela's photograph to poles, storefronts, bus stops. Her image appeared on television screens, her name repeated on the radio. A reward fund quickly climbed, eventually surpassing $70,000, fueled by donations from strangers who had never met her, but could not shake the image of a child taken in broad daylight. On November 30th, less than 2 weeks after the abduction, San Francisco 49ers quarterback Joe Montana stood before cameras and made a public plea for Michaela's safe return. His voice carried weight, his words echoing across the region. Tips poured in by the thousands, 5,000 in the first year alone, each one logged, each one chased until it led nowhere. Inside the department, frustration set in quietly. Leads were eliminated faster than they were generated. Hillsides yielded nothing. Parks revealed no trace. The fingerprints sat preserved, waiting for a name they could match to. An officer summed it up bluntly to a reporter by late December. "The only way we're closer," he said, "is that we've eliminated so many leads. But as far as knowing who did it, or why, or what happened to her, we're no closer." By the end of the first 48 hours, the initial surge of certainty had given way to something heavier. The search had been massive. The response had been immediate. And yet, the man who took Michaela had not been stopped. The wrong description had sent everyone running in the wrong direction. The right evidence waited quietly on a shelf. And as the days stretched into weeks, one truth settled in, unspoken but unmistakable. The window that mattered most had already begun to close. What followed would be years of searching, false hope, and endurance, while the answer remained just out of reach. Time did not move forward cleanly after Michaela Garecht was taken. It stretched instead, thin and uneven, marked not by progress but by repetition. The same questions asked again. The same roads driven over and over. The same photographs held up, studied, and set back down when nothing new emerged. In Hayward, the initial shock softened into something quieter but heavier. A constant awareness that the ordinary had been permanently disrupted. Inside the Hayward Police Department, the case files thickened. Tips arrived relentlessly in the early months. Then steadily, then sporadically. Each one logged, assigned, and chased down with careful discipline. By the end of the first year alone, investigators had received more than 5,000 tips. By 1994, that number had climbed past 15,000. Each lead carried a fragment of hope, someone who thought they had seen Michaela, someone who recognized a car, someone who believed they knew the man responsible. Each lead, almost without exception, ended the same way. Nowhere. Detectives followed them all. They drove long distances to knock on unfamiliar doors. They searched fields, empty lots, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings. Helicopters traced slow grids over hills and parks. Airplanes scanned stretches of land that looked endless from above. The work became methodical, almost ritualistic, as if precision alone might eventually force the truth to surface. At home, Sharon Garecht lived inside a different kind of routine. The phone rang constantly, sometimes late into the night. She learned to recognize the sound of hope before she answered, how her chest tightened, how her breathing changed, as well as the letdown that followed when the voice on the other end offered nothing solid. She might be in this town. I saw a girl who looks like her. I think I know who did it. Sharon listened to them all. She asked questions. She wrote things down. And when each lead collapsed, she absorbed the disappointment quietly and waited for the next call. Giving up was never part of the equation. As months turned into years, the case slipped into a familiar and dangerous phase. The cold case period. Not forgotten, not abandoned, but pushed further back on desks as newer emergencies demanded attention. Investigators rotated. Technology advanced. The fingerprints lifted from Michaela's scooter remained preserved, carefully stored. But without a match, they sat silent. False confessions added another layer of cruelty. In December 1992, an inmate in Indiana named Roger Hayward claimed he had buried Michaela's body in the Hunters Point area of San Francisco. When police followed up, he changed his story, saying she was buried in a gladiolus field in Union City instead. Investigators flew him to California and spent hours searching the field he identified. After 8 hours of digging and finding nothing, Hayward admitted he had invented the entire story. The punishment for his lie, additional years added to his sentence, did little to ease the damage done to the Garecht family. Each false lead reopened wounds Sharon worked hard to keep stitched together. The community carried the case with them, too. Michaela's face appeared on milk cartons and billboards across the country, her name joining a growing list of missing children that Americans saw daily without fully absorbing. Every year, on the anniversary of her abduction, ribbons appeared tied to a tree near the Rainbow Market. Some new, some faded by weather and time. They fluttered lightly in the breeze, a quiet reminder that the parking lot was not just a place people passed through, it was where everything had stopped. New suspects came and went, each one briefly drawing the case back into the light before fading again. When another child disappeared nearby, detectives examined the similarities carefully, searching for patterns that might connect separate nightmares into one explanation. Some names surfaced repeatedly, none with enough evidence to hold. Then, in 2009, something shifted. The nation watched as J.C. Lee Dugard reappeared after 18 years in captivity, rescued from a backyard in California. Her abductor, Philip Garrido, had taken her in broad daylight, forced her into a car, and hidden her in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Hayward lay less than an hour's drive from Garrido's home. His release from prison came only months before Michaela's abduction. The manner of the crime felt disturbingly familiar. Investigators moved quickly. They interviewed Garrido. They searched for connections. They re-examined timelines and descriptions, comparing them piece by piece. Hope stirred again, not because anyone wanted Garrido to be responsible, but because responsibility of any kind meant answers. None came. The investigation into Garrido yielded no evidence linking him to Michaela. The lead dissolved, leaving behind a familiar hollow space where certainty should have been. Years passed. Technology continued to advance. DNA databases expanded. Cold cases across the country began to yield results once thought impossible. Michaela's case remained open, waiting. Then, in 2012, another name entered the conversation, dragged in from a different kind of darkness. Wesley Shermantine, one of the so-called speed freak killers, wrote a letter from prison after his partner, Lauren Herzog, committed suicide. In it, he pointed out something investigators could not ignore. Herzog bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch of the man who abducted that Hayward girl. When detectives revisited the sketch, the similarity was unsettling. Katrina Rodriguez saw it too. "I thought then, and I think now. He could be the kidnapper," she said, her voice steady but weighted. "There are features that look very much like the man." Searches followed. At Shermantine's direction, law enforcement excavated abandoned wells in rural Linden, California, places where the speed freak killers had disposed of victims. Thousands of bone fragments were recovered, belonging to multiple individuals. For a moment, the possibility hovered, heavy and unavoidable. Then the DNA results came back. The bones were not Michaela's. They belonged to someone else. Another life claimed by violence. Another family grieving in parallel. The well gave up no answers for the Garecht case. Once again, hope rose just long enough to be taken away. Through all of it, Sharon Garecht did not stop. She maintained a public presence. She wrote. She spoke. She remembered. The case remained active at the Hayward Police Department, not because it moved quickly, but because it was never allowed to die. "We'll go anywhere," one investigator said. "Any corner of the earth, if it means bringing Michaela home, too." And somewhere inside those old files, inside evidence collected in the first chaotic hours, the answer waited untouched, unnamed, and closer than anyone yet realized. 2012 through December 21st. 2020, Hayward Police Department. The break did not arrive with sirens or sudden certainty. It came quietly, through paperwork, through routine, through a decision to look again at something that had been handled carefully and then set aside. Inside the Hayward Police Department, Michaela Garecht's file had never been closed. It sat among other cold cases, thick with reports, tips, transcripts, and photographs that documented more than 3 decades of effort. Detectives who inherited the case learned it the same way, by reading, by listening, by absorbing the weight of what had already failed. The evidence list was familiar. The timeline was memorized. The names of suspects, Bindner, Garrido, Herzog, had been circled, crossed out, and circled again. And there was the scooter. It had been collected within hours of the abduction, lifted from the Rainbow Market parking lot, and treated as evidence rather than a child's possession. Technicians had dusted it methodically, their brushes moving lightly across the metal frame and rubber grips. Latent fingerprints had emerged, partial but usable, and were photographed, catalogued, preserved. At the time, there was nowhere to send them that could produce an answer. The technology existed, but the databases did not. So the prints waited. Years later, as forensic capabilities expanded and fingerprint databases grew deeper and more interconnected, investigators returned to that evidence with renewed intent. This was not a dramatic decision. It happened during review meetings, during case audits, during conversations that began with the same question asked too many times to count. What do we still have that hasn't been fully exhausted? The answer, once again, was the scooter. A detective pulled the old evidence log and requested the fingerprint cards be re-examined. The process was slow and precise. The prints were digitized, enhanced, uploaded into updated systems that could compare them against offenders who had not even been known to police in 1988. Each step was documented, each match attempt logged and dismissed until, finally, one comparison did not fall away. A name surfaced: David Misch. The initial hit did not come with certainty, only probability. Detectives did not celebrate. They verified. They reran the comparison. They checked chain of custody, confirmed dates, made sure there was no contamination, no error introduced by time or technology. When the match held, they widened the scope, pulling Misch's criminal history and laying it beside Michaela's timeline. The overlap was immediate and disturbing. David Misch lived in Hayward. He was present in the area in 1988. His history showed escalating violence. In 1989, he murdered 36-year-old Margaret Ball in Hayward. Later investigations would link him to the 1986 murders of Michelle Xavier and Jennifer Dewey in nearby Fremont crimes marked by brutality and control. This was not a man on the edges of violent behavior. This was someone who had crossed into it repeatedly. Investigators began reconstructing his movements around the time of Michaela's abduction, pulling records, interviewing associates, mapping patterns. The description Katrina Rodriguez had given decades earlier: white male, 20s, tall, slender, long, dirty blonde hair, acne-scarred face aligned closely enough to make the room go quiet when the comparison was laid out. The scooter had not lied. With the fingerprint match in hand, the investigation accelerated. Detectives moved deliberately, aware of the weight of what they were about to do and the scrutiny that would follow. They consulted with prosecutors, reviewed every step taken since 1988, and prepared the case with the understanding that time itself would be the defense's greatest weapon. On December 21, 2020, more than 32 years after Michaela Garecht was taken, the Hayward Police Department and the FBI stood before the public and announced the charges. David Misch was charged with the kidnapping and murder of Michaela Garecht. The words landed with a force that rippled outward through the department, through the community, through the people who had carried the case with them for decades. For the first time, Michaela's name was spoken alongside someone who could be held accountable. There was relief, there was shock, and there was grief, sharpened rather than eased by the knowledge that the truth had waited so long to be heard. Sharon Garecht listened as the details were laid out, her posture rigid, her expression controlled. When reporters asked how it felt to finally have an answer, she did not rush to respond. "It doesn't bring her back," she said quietly, "but it matters that the truth is known." The arrest did not come with remains. It did not answer every question. Investigators could now say who had taken Michaela, but not where he had taken her. Not what had happened in the moments after the car disappeared down Mission Boulevard. The silence surrounding her final hours remained. Still, something fundamental had changed. The fingerprint left on a scooter touched in seconds, preserved for decades, had finally spoken. It had cut through false leads, misdirection, and time itself to point unambiguously at the man responsible. Justice, delayed beyond reason, had at last found a voice. What remained now was to understand what that justice could and could not repair. The announcement did not end the case. It changed its shape. In the days after David Misch was charged, the Hayward Police Department moved from investigation to preparation, from searching outward to building inward. Detectives sat in windowless rooms with stacks of files spread across long tables, rereading statements that had once felt incomplete and now landed with new weight. Timelines were redrawn, not to discover who, but to determine how much could be proven, what could be said with certainty, and where the gaps would remain forever. Prosecutors reviewed the fingerprint evidence again and again, testing it against every standard the law required. Chain of custody, method of collection, storage conditions, technological evolution. Each question demanded a precise answer, and investigators provided it, step by step, showing how the scooter had been secured within hours of the abduction, how the prints had been lifted, preserved, and re-examined only when technology could finally give them a name. In court filings, Michaela was no longer described as missing. She was described as murdered. The shift carried a quiet finality. David Misch did not stand before cameras offering explanations. He did not confess publicly. His presence in the case came through documents, through fingerprints, through the violent history that prosecutors laid out to establish pattern and capacity. At the time of the charge, he was already serving a life sentence for the murder of Margaret Ball, with additional charges pending for the killings of Michelle Xavier and Jennifer Dewey. He would not walk free, regardless of the outcome in Michaela's case. Justice, in this instance, was not about preventing future harm. It was about naming the past correctly. For Sharon Garecht, the resolution arrived layered with contradictions. There was validation, confirmation that her daughter had not simply vanished, that the years of insistence had been justified. There was also a deeper grief, sharpened by clarity. Uncertainty, painful as it had been, had left room for imagination. Certainty closed that space. "She's not coming home," Sharon said. Not as a realization, but as a statement of fact she had already lived with for years. Still, knowing who had taken Michaela mattered. It mattered because it placed responsibility where it belonged. It mattered because it ended the speculation that had circled the family for decades. And it mattered because it demonstrated something rare in cold cases. That evidence collected correctly, even when it seemed to lead nowhere, could outlast time. Katrina Rodriguez carried a different kind of aftermath. She had been the only witness to the abduction, the child who saw everything and could do nothing. For years, she replayed the moment endlessly, the scream, the grip, the door slamming shut, wondering if there was anything she could have done differently, anything she could have said louder or sooner. When the charge was announced, the relief did not erase that memory, but it reframed it. "I told the truth," she said. "I always did." The description she gave as a 9-year-old acne-scarred face, long, dirty blonde hair, large, light-colored sedan had been accurate. It had simply been drowned out by louder, wrong information in the first crucial hours. Knowing that her memory had held, even when the system had failed to act on it in time, mattered in a way that words could not fully capture. In Hayward, the case resurfaced in conversations that had never truly stopped. People returned to the Rainbow Market parking lot, now altered by time and renovation, and tried to orient themselves within a space that no longer looked the way it once had. The ribbons tied to the nearby tree fluttered again, joined by new ones placed after the announcement, some handwritten, some store-bought, all bearing Michaela's name. The case took on renewed cultural weight. Commentators pointed to it as an example of both failure and persistence failure in the critical first 48 hours, when the wrong suspect description sent search efforts astray, and persistence in the decades-long preservation of evidence that ultimately broke through. Law enforcement agencies cited it in training sessions, emphasizing the importance of verifying witness accounts quickly and safeguarding physical evidence even when it appears to go silent. Technology had changed the outcome, but only because the groundwork had been laid properly from the beginning. Michaela Garecht's story did not conclude with a recovered body or a clear account of her final moments. Those details remain unknown, sealed inside actions taken beyond the reach of witnesses and evidence. What the case offered instead was accountability, partial, delayed, but real. Today, Michaela is remembered not only as a victim, but as a reminder of how quickly ordinary moments can fracture, of how a single error can ripple outward for years, and of how something as small as a fingerprint, left on a child's scooter in the span of seconds, can carry the weight of truth across decades. The morning she left home, Michaela expected to be gone only briefly. A short errand, a familiar route, a plan that required no second thought. The world did not give her that return, but it did, eventually, give her name back to the truth. And in the end, that truth spoken clearly, without speculation or distortion, stands as the final act of resilience in a story defined by loss. Michaela Joy Garecht was 9 years old. She was taken in plain sight, and she was never forgotten. If you remember that morning in Hayward, if you were near Mission Boulevard, if you ever heard someone speak about a light-colored sedan, a man with long, dirty blonde hair, or anything that felt off at the time, that memory still matters. Even now, justice came late for Michaela, but awareness can come now. Share her story, talk about it, question what you think you know about ordinary moments, and ask yourself, how many other answers are still waiting quietly because no one has looked closely enough yet?